Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Coaching for Millennials. I am your host, José Miguel Longo, and I am so excited to be here with you this week and today. Um, Something that I want to call out right from the get go is that I know I had insisted that I would deliver on providing and creating 2 episodes per week, and I failed on that promise last week, and I am sorry for that. And the reality is that I didn't execute or action in the way that I had managed my time, which is something that I am working on. And I always strive for progress, not perfection, as a recovering perfectionist and a very type A person that has to feel like everything has to be in order. Life was not in order last week and life was lifing. So there was a lot of things that I had to overcome, which haha is the theme of this week's episode, that I needed to get through. But here's the thing. I feel like this is also a win because I'm also bringing you an episode each week as opposed to not bringing you anything, which I think I may have fallen short on the first piece, but I think I've really in succeeding on the second. So I wanted to just call out from the get go because I'm sure those of you who are subscribing to the channel or subscribing to the podcast through YouTube or whatever it might be that you listen to it, you're like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? He just told us he was going to come back and give us an episode on Tuesday and Thursday. I promise you I will get to that. I will get to that point, but it's going to take me a little bit to get some projects that I have that are time prioritization into their unique spheres to be able to deliver that. So thank you for your patience, and I really appreciate it. Now, let's jump into the segment that I love to call what I'm liking, what I'm watching, and what to watch out for. So I would be remiss as a Hispanic if I did not talk about the Super Bowl performance that Benito gave us on Sunday. I was at the edge of my seat, literally with my feet on the table, holding back the tears, but having the tears like watered up in my eyes. If you ever looked at that image of the little kid with the tears under their eyes, that was me. But then I was also like dancing and shaking in my seat. I had an impulse to want to get up, but I didn't want to like get up to scare the dogs. And I also, for as extra as I am, and for as extra as I show up, everywhere else, I didn't want to be super extra. I was just enjoying it every second of it and every minute of it and like soaking it up. When, he jumped on the telephone poles, or the power poles, I should say, that to me gave me goosebumps because if you don't know this, I'm Dominican, and Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic are literally right next to each other, the two islands in the Caribbean. My sister's from another mother, my brother's from another father. And notoriously, Puerto Rico has had, consistent problems since their inception of being part of the United States, problems with their power. And Dominican Republic does too. I mean, Dominican Republic is its own country, which is a really important conversation in regards to Puerto Rico. But in the framing of like what I saw there, I was like, wow, this is a really loud message. And whether you understand Spanish or not, this is a opportunity to educate yourself. And what was really beautiful about the whole thing was that it was in Spanish. I had goosebumps the whole time. I literally had like I said, I was like, I get emotional just because I'm an emotional human. But to see someone show up on the television on a platform like the Super Bowl in a country where right now people who are Black and brown and people who are of Hispanic descent, and even if you're not Hispanic, it's even white people, it doesn't even matter at this point, are just being threatened as their identity. And because other people have so much hate in their heart, and it just makes it disgusting. The other thing for me that sent a very loud and powerful message is that there is a disconnect in our generation, millennials particularly, but also even if we go back to Gen X, and it's heavily leaning into the Gen Z population, where we don't have enough conversations around our heritage, our culture. And I wanted to bring that up intentionally here because even though this is kind of covering what I'm liking, what I'm watching, um, it's important to note that if our community, our culture, our ethnicity is truly invaluable and important to us in how we live every single day as part of our identity, we need to know more about where we come from and who we are. But it's not even just the fact that you can identify as being Hispanic or Latino, it's also about the language. Something that I pick on a lot of people for is if you know Spanish as a native Spanish speaker, or even if like you half ass it, talk to your kids in Spanish. Make them watch the telenovelas, make them watch the music, make them speak to their abuelita, abuelito, whoever it might be in the household or in the family. That can really help influence and create that cultural connection. There's such a strong message that's sent when you can stand there and speak the language and defend what is a part of your identity and your culture and the influence that that plays. There is data that shows how the generational disparity of the language is. So right now, 40% of the US population has identified as Hispanic or Latino. This is based on data from the 2020 census. What I find really interesting is that I don't know how the data was particularly captured in that instance, but what I find interesting is that it didn't highlight how many people in the household speak Spanish. And for whatever reason, I couldn't get into all those details. I'm sure if I dug deeper to bring that to this conversation and this space, that I might be able to find it. But I always find it interesting where I'll meet people and I've just had this conversation with my brother the other day. I was like, why when are the girls gonna learn Spanish? I have three nieces, and my oldest niece, Caitlin, she's in college and she apparently has been taking Spanish while in school and is doing really well. So she's kind of becoming more fluent. And the other two girls, they understand, a little bit here and there, but don't really know all the things. And my brother's wife, her parents are around the kids a lot and they only speak Spanish. And I'm like, God, this is like gold right here. It should happen. I actually am a native Spanish speaker. Spanish is my first language. So I learned English while I was going to school. And at home, what shifted was that from the time that I was, 0 to basically 4 or 5 years old, all that was spoken to me was Spanish. I was reading the Spanish newspaper El Diario or El Caribe, which is Dominican newspapers that you can get in New York City and Queens, depending on where you lived back in the day, that my dad would sit there and would read with me. And that just became part of my routine with him. But when I started school and I started pre K and kindergarten, I had to learn English. And it wasn't that it was hard. I did struggle with the reading piece of it early on and the following along of framing the language. But what I think is unique is that when you learn a language at a younger age, it's so quick and easy. I wanted to snap my fingers, but I wanted to be mindful of the microphone. It's so quick and easy to carry that through. Yes, if you don't use it, you lose it. Totally understand that piece. But it's so important to our culture that even more so now that we use the opportunity to have those conversations, that we learn about where our family is from, whether you're first generation or second generation. I'm first generation. And being able to influence that as you carry it on. It's also really interesting, regardless of what nationality you are. You could ask a white person where they're from and they don't know where they're from. They'll say, I'm from here, wherever they're standing. I'm like, well, that's not really where you're from. Like, where is your nationality? Where is your family from? They don't know, like, just people in general. So I am bringing all this to life based on what I saw on television, what it meant for me, and having so much pride as a Hispanic person, as someone who really appreciates all the things that I grew up with and having the privilege of being able to speak Spanish in my household and still speaking it today and continuing to speak about the culture and the identity that's part of who I am. I've always said I'm a gay Hispanic, male, and that's kind of like the identities as they intertwine. I feel like I'm more connected to the gay part of my identity than I am to the Hispanic, but it's just because of where it tipped in the scale that was as I was growing up and when I really started to become myself and who I am. But ultimately, what I want to leave with before we shift into our topic of today is really just talk to your kids about where you come from and where your family is from and that generation so that they can continue to talk about that as they grow up because it is a part of who you are and it's so important that we have that conversation. And I know there was so many other underlying messages as part of Bad Bunny's performance and where the Super Bowl was going with this and why it was so powerful. I don't want to get into the politics of it because it's not for this particular time in the podcast, but I will get into the politics of it because it just sends such a strong message when you have people who, dare I say, on the other side want to act like this country is informed by immigrants. And the reality is that the only people that really truly quote unquote belong here are the Native Americans, and their land was stolen from them and their land was taken from them. And the same thing can be spoken of the Tainos, which is the native indigenous people of Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, all of the Antiguas of what is the Caribbean islands. I could be a historian on this. I like literally lived in Dominican Republic for 2.5 years, and I took so much history of understanding where we come from. So I'm not getting into all the politics of it. I'm not getting into those pieces, but there will be a conversation, I promise you, at some point soon. But let's shift gears here a little bit and jump into what we're here to talk about. So last Tuesday, the episode that I released was focused on why we feel stuck. And today we're going deeper into part 2 of that. And ultimately, the idea behind this mini series is based off of a free guide that I created about maybe 3 years ago, actually. And this guide is intended to help individuals get some clarity and actionable objectives. I'm trying to find the right words to say, but gain some clarity and create some actionable objectives on how to get unstuck and focused. And so, as we captured last week, we focused on what it meant to be stuck and what that looks like and how to identify it. Today, what we're focusing on is unblocking you from being stuck. So, overcoming what the obstacles are. And then, also, more importantly, what we're going to do is really get some clarity as to why is it happening. Because one of the things that often happen is that in our minds, when we talk about our mindset, there's an internal framework that's operating inside your brain. And sometimes when we feel blocked, we oftentimes blame ourselves because it could be something outside of what we're thinking. So in these instances, what I'm hoping to help support is we want to be focused on a place of being motivated and focusing on time and focusing on discipline to not allow those mindset obstacles take over. We want to be able to go deeper in understanding what is having you stuck or what is making you feel stuck and what is actually doing it. So, being able to name it, being able to frame it in a way that you can take reflection and being able to, take action. So, a couple of points that I want to outline here as we go through the journey of what we're talking about today. The first thing I want to outline is what is an external obstacle and what is an internal obstacle. So, external obstacles are things like workload, lack of support, environment, and resources. So, those are things that are oftentimes in your space, but you don't necessarily have full control over owning, managing, and being able to take action with. So, those are the external ones. The internal ones, this is all the mindset game that I love to talk about. This is all of that saboteur and the positive psychology things that I like to go deep into. So, internal obstacles are belief, fear of failure, self doubt, identity friction. Again, the mindset piece. So, what I want to teach you today is the deeper blocks that are often internal, how to identify what is fear, looking at what is uncertainty, and really paying attention to the stories that we're telling ourselves that are preventing us from actually being productive in overcoming the obstacles. So that's the framework that we're working off of for the most part of this conversation. Now, I want to also make sure that if we don't differentiate the difference between internal, external obstacles or blocks, we're always going to be in that stuck phase, right? We're not going to get out of it if we don't start to call it out and identifying what they are. So, things to remember is that if we don't differentiate between internal and external blockers, we will stay stuck in the vagueness space. And so when you're vague, obstacles feel overwhelming. So again, adding that mindset with emotions is not a good recipe. So let's focus right now and shift a little bit to why vague stress keeps you frozen. And say that 3 times fast. So, a question for you. Have you ever thought, and this is the question, I don't ever know what the problem is. It just feels heavy. I'm raising my hand. Like, I can't tell you until I start to dissect something what exactly is the reason it's happening. And it's taken me perhaps maybe years of, like, I don't want to say therapy, but years of me being able to understand where my mindset shifts go, where I have to listen to the saboteur that's showing up and call it out, and being able to organize my thoughts and emotions so that I can become more self aware of how to strategize in taking action. This can present itself differently for people. And so the thing about, the vague stress is that it is ambiguous, right? Most people and humans in general, we're wired to react to definitive prompts. So things that we can see, things that we can name, and things that we can identify. But when there's a trigger that's caused by vague stress, we have a frozen response. And then our brains become scattered. And then we also have a behavior of avoiding it because there's fear of what that could be and what it is. So it's a kind of like the idea of, the evil that you know versus the evil that you don't know. That becomes where the space you live in. And sometimes out of fear and out of not knowing what's there, we tend to pull back and we tend to, not want to go deeper into it. This is all about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And the only way you can take action in something is when you start to get clarity. So here's a little bit of insight. Clarity replaces the feeling and the emotion of being overwhelmed. Once you can name what's the blocker or what's causing you to feel stuck, it stops becoming ambiguous. It stops feeling as if it's something you don't know. And then what also happens from an emotional standpoint and a physical standpoint is that that weight starts to be lifted off of you. You then start to realize that, like, oh, I actually have something I can work with because I've called out what it is. I've gotten some clarity as to what is actually making me feel overwhelmed or causing me to feel stuck. And now I can actually start to take a little bit of a step in the right direction. So here's a little bit of the call to action that I want to make sure we address. One is go download the free guide. Unstuck and Focus is really intended to help you analyze the obstacles that you're facing in life, you're facing in your career, you're facing your relationships. You can apply it to anything and everything. Okay, so this is the opportunity for me to say, just go download the guide. It's free. I promise you. You can find it at coachingformillennials.com. If you scroll down on my page, it's a landing page, you'll see that you can subscribe to a newsletter. You'll see that you can find the free guide and a couple of other goodies that are on there. So jumping back in, the next point that I want to bring up is after we've I gotten some clarity, we want to break things down so that we can get organized and structured. So what does this mean? This means looking at goals, looking at fears and looking at how we can create some wins out of that. So the thing that I think oftentimes works really well in these instances is identifying what is it that you're looking to overcome? What is it that you're looking to do? And what is it that you're feeling challenged by? So here's the process or the order of operations. Number one, name what the challenge is, write it down, get a journal, get a notebook. This is one of those things where coming to this podcast, I'm always going to tell you bring your pen and paper because we've got some golden nuggets. This is where the golden nuggets start to come into play. So we're going to start to break down what I like to call restoring the agency. So the teachable moment here is that having huge goals, huge fears, and big challenges require you to shrink them down into bite-sized chunks that allow you to, one, frame them in a way that are achievable. So when we look at the obstacles, particularly, you are now defining what it is. You're breaking it down so that you can see from the bigger picture, like, what is this obstacle that's in front of me? And I know it's hard to like, what do I call it, right? Like we want to name it something. But for you, it could be different, right? Everyone has different obstacles in their life they're looking to overcome. And the reason why this is so important is because you want to get unstuck from those obstacles. So naming it, breaking it down, what are the parts of the obstacle? And then third, evaluate the control. What can you control from the obstacle? Remember, we have internal and external ones. If it's an internal one, that's the mindset. That's the brain. I can do mindset coaching all day. That's when I always say come to the church of José Miguel because we're going to get your mind right. But when it's external, you have to understand what are the barriers and what are the factors in those external ones. I know we mean before, it can be lack of support. You can work with getting support, right? It's understanding who your community is, understanding who your people are. So that's an important one. Now, something that I think might be helpful from a framework is this is me quoting and riffing. If the obstacle is I feel burnt out and unproductive, break into the feeling, the task, expectation, and the boundaries that you need to create for yourself so that you can then feel productive and not burnt out. It's a matter of reframing. And if you can call it out, then it makes it a little bit clearer. It's one of the reasons why, yes, I have a lot of notebooks. I have a digital notebook that I usually use for meeting with my coaching clients and keeping notes because it's password protected and it's secured. But then when I'm talking in conversation or I'm making notes for podcasting or just things that I need to get done on my to-do list, I have 1,000 post-its literally sitting on my desk. There's nothing better for me to get into the beginning of my week and coming through and throwing out the ones that I don't need because I've already accomplished them. Like it's my process. It may seem scattered for other people, but I have a really big productivity organizer. And the thing is so bulky that it prevents me from actually using it. But in this instance, when I'm thinking of all the obstacles that sometimes make me feel burnt out, that's kind of how I felt last week. There was so many things that I was challenging myself that I had to take a step back and say, let's be realistic here. I want to manage my emotions around this. I want to manage what I can achieve. And I want to focus on what's critically important. And I had to go through the process of saying, okay, this is a priority because it's a time sensitive project. I have to shift my energy and focus on that. And I have to then say, later to this here on the side. So the takeaway with this is the takeaway here is that you can break down your obstacles. And once you start to see them, you can then start to create some solutions that will make you feel unstuck, right? Because that's the name of the game. How do we get unstuck? How do we overcome these obstacles? So before we wrap up today, I want to provide you with some call to actions. I like to call them out because I think it's important in framing this and having this conversation with you that you have something that's actionable and that you're taking away from the episode. So I already mentioned before, if you haven't already, go to my website, coachingformillennials.com, and download the guide. Again, it's free. There's no cost to you to do it. I want to make sure people can get unblocked. And I know that right now things feel really heavy, and sometimes we have to, step away from things to get a really clear perspective and understanding what's happening in the moment. But when we're stuck in different facets of our lives and we're trying to get a clear picture of the direction we want to go in, I think this guide might help you. And take your time doing it, because ultimately we have one more episode and you can come back to the other two, meaning this one and the first one, on how to overcome and use this guide to manage your space, your time, your life, and your career. So that's number one. The second call to action here is a obstacle analysis exercise. So your assignment for this week, and the assignment is obviously pick one major thing where you feel stuck. Using the exercise guide let me rephrase that. Using the exercise in the guide, complete it step by step, and then write your answers either in a notes app or in a journal, or even if you printed the guide, you can, or if you have a PDF editor, you can fill it out right in the guide if you wanted to. So the idea is to take action here. This naming the obstacle, getting clarity as to what exactly is making you feel stuck, and then being able to go through the exercise step by step so that you're now able to focus and shift your mindset and the energy you're bringing to the next thing. The last thing here is a reflection prompt. So, which obstacle feels most emotionally charged and why? The emotional charge is your true signal. So, things to remember here is that when we're not solving everything, this week, we're naming the real blocks. So we want to lead with intention. We want to take the space and time to be focused and clear on what we're doing and overcoming, but also giving ourselves space and time to process. Because the only way you heal, you learn, and you grow when you shift your mindset is if you're intentional, you're reflective, and that creates self-awareness. So in this process, even though we're taking it, week by week and step by step, I promise you that you'll feel better in doing it this way as opposed to doing it all at once, because you may not be able to come back to it and reflect on it the way you would really want to intentionally. So I leave you with that. Next week, we'll pick back up with the last part 3 of the Unstuck and Focused mini series. And we're going to talk about mindset, emotional intelligence, and taking consistent action without self-punishment. It's my favorite part. This is where all the transformation begins. This is where you start to be able to call out what are some of the things that are blocking you emotionally. But the framing of it all comes down to understanding what emotional intelligence is. How do you develop that emotional IQ, or the EIQ as they say? And where is the mindset, right? I I did not coin this phrase. One of my former supervisors, good friend, I love her to death, KJD, she would say, you better get your mind right. And she would say it in a way that was um, intentional, purposeful, but also in a way that was as like a term of endearment, right? I never forgot that. It always stuck with me whenever I was in a space, and even like in my coaching journey as becoming a better coach time and time again. It's the framing of like, I better get my mind right, because the way I'm thinking and going about this isn't going to help me or anybody else. And in my life, I think about that the same way. So to close up the loop here and put the beautiful bow on top of it, I want to leave you with a little positive thing. You don't have to be perfect to move forward. You just have to be clear. Say that again. You don't have to be perfect to move forward. You just have to be clear. Thanks so much for sticking with me for the last 30 minutes and for listening to me rant about Bad Bunny, Benito. I hope this episode brought you some joy, brought you some insight, brought you some understanding and learning. Take this with you and share with someone who you think might need it. Until the next time, peace and love. Catch you next week. Bye.